Worked 3 jobs to support my younger sister's college. Dreams only to learn. She lied about being enrolled and was living with a married man. So I tracked her down and exposed everything to our parents during Thanksgiving dinner. I'm 30 years of age now, and I've been employed since the age of 17. I never really had an option. My father departed when I was 10, and my mother, God bless her soul, worked day and night just to be able to put a roof over our heads. I grew up in a little Indiana town, the kind where people still wave to each other off of their front porches, and everyone knows what type of beer you buy. My little sister Lila, she was the brains. She was pretty, smart, always the sweetheart. She sat at the window reading books while I was out mowing grass for gas money. I didn't care. I thought she would escape one day. That was the wish I held on to, that she would have a life and not one like mine. When I was 18, I left college and started working full-time. Initially, a gas station, then a warehouse, then construction. 3 jobs by 24 and struggling to keep them. Early morning loading trucks, evenings in a diner, and weekends fixing air conditioners with my friend Ray. It was paradise, but I didn't protest because Lila had just received college acceptance. At least, that's what she was telling us. She held the letter in front of us, told us she got accepted to a state university in Kentucky. I remember that night like it was yesterday. Mom wept, hugged the letter like it was holy scripture. I promised her I'd pay whatever tuition we couldn't cover on scholarships. I even remember yelling, "She is worth this chance, Mom. I will make sure she receives it." And I meant it, all of it. The first year, I wired Lila money each month, sometimes $500, sometimes $1,000 if I took on additional shifts. She'd call me every now and then, send me pictures of her dorm room, her textbooks, even her so-called friends. She was learning psychology, working with trauma victims. I was proud of her. So proud I spent my tax refund on something besides the used truck I'd been wanting. I wrote it off to books and expenses. I boasted to everyone in my office about how my sister was going to be the first college graduate in our family. I wore that pride like body armor over all the back pain and exhaustion. Then year 2 arrived, and something started to feel off. She wouldn't call as frequently. Her calls were shorter. Some days she'd not even write back for days. I would ask her about classes, about instructors, but her answers were rehearsed, vague. "It's good. Busy." I once asked to come see her campus, and she said it was the wrong time, that her roommate had mono and they were quarantining. I believed her, because big brothers do that. We believe. But something didn't sit well with me. Mom started getting calls from Lila during that time asking for more money. Rent, car issues, doctor visits. I'd wire it in, no questions asked. I figured if she was having a hard time keeping her head above water while she was in school, I'd rather she have to think about school and not worry about money. I told Ray, my coworker, one night after a long, arduous shift, and he said, "Man, you're killing yourself for her." "You're sure she's even in school?" I snapped back at him. "Sure she is. She's not like that." But that single question, those 4 words, plagued me. Months passed. I didn't hear her voice all summer, just texts, all lies, working on a research project, leaving town with friends. My phone's dead, little things that seemed harmless until they started mounting up. I got curious, maybe paranoid, so I went through her supposed university's online student registry. I typed in her full name. Nothing, no listing. I tried variations, still nothing. I felt something harden in the pit of my stomach. I was thinking that I had misspelled it, or maybe there was a technical glitch. So I called the registrar office of the university the next morning before I went to work. I told them I was her brother, that I had to check on her registration for the purposes of a loan. The woman on the phone paused and said to me, "Sorry, sir, but we have no one registered under that name." I hung up. I just sat there in my truck parked in front of the warehouse across the street, gripping the steering wheel in my fists until my hands ached. My heart was pounding, and for the first time in years I was angry. Not the tired kind of angry, but the sharp kind that burns your chest. I phoned her right away, and she did not respond. Texted her, no reply. That evening, I did not rest. I could not get anything out of my head. The staged dorm pictures, the perfect stories, the money. My mom crying with joy over that letter. It was all a fabrication. Why? 2 days later, I decided I needed to know. I informed Mom I was traveling to Kentucky to surprise Lila. Mom was excited, asked me to bring back photographs. I simply nodded. I drove 6 hours non-stop, replaying every single conversation we ever had. Upon arriving on the campus, I took off walking like a fool, trying to find her dorm building. Naturally, nobody knew her. I visited the business office, asked again, same answer. She's not in our system. That was when I realized she never had been, not for a single day. My sister, the kid I had worked my back to provide for, was leading a whole different life somewhere else. That drive home felt like it took forever. I didn't tell Mom yet. I needed proof. Something concrete. I spent the next week trawling through her social media, trying to connect the dots. All of her accounts were private, but then I spotted a new Instagram account under a pseudonym. Same smile, same face. But this time, she was in none of the dorms. She was in a nice apartment, having wine, posing with someone I didn't recognize. A man, older, maybe in his 40s. No names, no tags. But in one photo, I noticed something. A wedding band on his hand. My stomach dropped. I looked closer, and there was no mistake. She was cohabiting with a married man. That broke something within me. All those years, all those hours, all that sacrifice. For what? For her to play house with a man who was already married? I was disgusted, but more than that, I felt silly. I'd trusted her with absolutely everything, loved her more than anyone else, and she'd exploited it. I remember punching the wall of my flat, leaving a dent that I could never fix. I sat on the floor afterwards, gasping, not knowing what to do next. I wanted to call her, yell, demand that she be honest with me, but then what? She'd just lie some more. I didn't tell Mom. Not yet. I needed to see it for myself, needed to determine if it was as bad as it seemed, and deep within, part of me hoped I was wrong, that maybe there was a different reason, that maybe the man wasn't married, but that hope was fast fading. The week prior to Thanksgiving, I finally decided that I needed to approach her. I had tracked her apartment with a combination of outdated addresses, electric company listings, and a little serendipity. I parked 2 blocks off, parked in my truck, staring at the building like some bird of prey. Her apartment was pleasant, too pleasant for someone supposedly working her way through college. A shiny little condo, plants on the balcony, and the seductive smell of expensive takeout wafting through the air. I sat there, chest tightened up, mind racing, wondering everything I thought I knew about her. The Lila I knew. The one who had aspirations of being a therapist, who talked about helping others, who cried over a stray in our backyard, no longer existed. Or maybe she never did. I called her that evening. Nobody answered. I left a message, tried to be calm. Lila, it's me. We must have words. Call me, please. I was embarrassed. I wanted to smash the door down, ask her what was going on, but I had to be cautious. I needed evidence. Part of me was humiliated. Part of me was angry. I thought about all those late nights, coming home from a 12-hour shift, collapsing into bed, knowing she was studying, dreaming, striving to make something of ourselves. All of that a fabrication. And now, here she was, in luxury that I couldn't even get used to, with a man who didn't belong to her. The following day, I entered the lobby of her building under the guise of bringing a package. The concierge didn't know her, told her she most likely used a different name. I knew she did. I asked around quietly, talked to the neighbors. One of them told me they saw her with a guy who always wore a wedding ring. My heart dropped. My hands shook. This was not rebellion or cheating on an exam or playing truancy. She was living on a lie, and I was funding it, blindly, for years. I drove home that night in shocked silence, thinking about Mom and Dad. I could picture the look on their faces as I delivered the news, the same look they'd had that day she'd gotten her letter of acceptance to college. But this time, there would be no tears of joy. I'd recalled Thanksgiving, just around the corner, and a plan formed. I wanted to tell them everything, but I needed it to hit hard, to be incontrovertible. I couldn't just tell them. I had to show. Each lie, each text message, each bank withdrawal, all would be laid out in all its splendor at the dinner table. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke up early, my heart racing. Mom had woken up early, humming, preparing the turkey like she always did. Dad watched television news, drinking coffee, unaware of the storm brewing. I said nothing, helped stuff, tried to be natural, but with every second that ticked by, it felt heavier than the last. Lila showed up an hour later, in a new dress, hair perfect, smile blinding, as though everything was fine. My stomach twisted into knots. I was a trap slamming shut around her. The dinner was served, chatter filled the room, and I waited for the right moment. Once we all had plates and hands with drinks, I slid my phone across the table. "You all want to take a look?" I asked, voice steady but gentle. Mom scowled. Dad blinked once. Lila remained motionless. I flipped open the first folder of photographs, letters in which she'd admitted to fabricating courses, photos of her and the man in her apartment, proof of rent checks and gifts she'd accepted from me and Mom under the guise that she had to pay tuition. The table grew quiet. Lila's skin paled. She'd opened her mouth, but nothing had come out. I blew through it all, patiently laying out each piece, giving dates, facts, evidence she couldn't deny. Mom's shaking hands, Dad's locked jaw. I knew the devastation etched on their faces in every fold. I wanted to yell, scream, but kept my voice steady. Let the truth speak for itself. I wanted them to understand what she'd done, not just to me, but to us all, to the years we'd sacrificed, the faith we'd placed in her. Finally, she fell, sobbing, apologies spilling out in a flood. She begged, didn't know how to make it right, that she'd made mistakes, that she loved us, but the damage was done. I couldn't help but see the betrayal, the manipulation, the 10 years of lies. I seethed with anger, sadness, and a debilitating sense of guilt for enabling it. Mom wept quietly into her napkin. Dad sat rigid, face impassive, staring at the table as if he was attempting to erase the past 10 years from memory. At dinner time, I went outside in an effort to cool off. The air was crisp, the sun dropping behind the trees, shadows stretching across the pavement. I thought about the concessions I'd made, the plans I'd built for her, the blind faith I'd placed, and I realized something more. This wasn't just about her. It was about me too, about realizing that love, even for family, has its boundaries, that blind faith hurts as much as betrayal. I'd known that I could not undo what she'd done, but I could control the way I reacted. Inside, Lila was sitting quietly, Mom still sniffing, Dad having poured himself another drink, and the house felt thick with a stifling silence. There was no need for me to say anything further. The truth was out, and now it was up to them to decide what to do next. It was a release, in a twisted manner for me. Painful, yes, but finally honest. For the first time in years, I didn't feel as though I was fighting with a ghost, as though I was fighting over something that existed not. It was the deceptions that were destroyed, dragged out into the cold light of day. Thanksgiving week was somber, actually too somber. Lila barely spoke at all. Mom wandered the house in a haze, and Dad refused to look at me anymore. I didn't expect to be forgiven, and honestly, I wasn't even positive if I wanted them to forgive me. I spent most of the weekend in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling, reliving every conversation, every lie, trying to understand why she did it. And the more I thought about it, the more confusing it became. Lila wasn't selfish. She was scared. Scared of being dull. Scared of not succeeding. Scared of telling the truth about the reality that she didn't want the life that we all thought she did. That fear, I could understand. It did not pardon the betrayal, but it made sense in a way that weighted my chest with something heavier than anger. Monday came around and I went back to work. I tried to lose myself in long days, fixing HVAC units with Ray, stacking boxes in the warehouse, anything to avoid thinking about the chaos at home. But each text I received, each post on social media, made me think of her, of the fact that she was out there living a life she'd constructed around lies. I found myself looking at my phone, picturing her face, questioning if she felt bad, or if she even knew what she'd done. I sat out on the porch one night, beer in hand, and remembered when she was 10 years old, sobbing on my lap after a skinned knee, sobbing because of a lost science fair project. I rocked her, talked softly to her, reassured her everything would be okay, that we'd make it right. And now, 20 years later, here she was, lying to people who had quite literally given her everything. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and revulsion, a knot that I couldn't untie. Mom finally called me, her voice trembling. "I can't bear to look at her the same," she sobbed. She knew we trusted her. She knew how hard you worked. I would not argue. I said she wasn't the first to deceive relatives. She wouldn't be the last. What mattered was what happened next. Mom admitted she had already considered forgiving her, that she wanted to protect her, but couldn't. And I realized something significant. This was not about me, not about fury. This was about setting boundaries, about making Lila realize there are consequences, even from family. I went to go talk to her one last time. Not to yell, not to punish, but to make her see. I drove to her house once again. No games this time. I pushed the doorbell, and she opened it, white, shaking, as if she knew that discussion was unavoidable. I looked at her, and I said, "Do you realize what you did? How many people you hurt? How much money, time, trust you wasted?" She swallowed, eyes wide, shaking voice. I didn't mean..." I held up a hand. "No, don't. I just want you to see the entire scope. You fibbed about college, fibbed about your life, and fibbed to mom and dad, and you allowed me to work myself to death over something that wasn't taking place. That is not okay, Lila. She cried. Real, do not stop tears. I did not stand, did not hold her. I left her to the fate she'd constructed for herself. She pleaded with me to forgive her, but I was firm. I cited Thanksgiving, the evidence, the pain she'd inflicted. For hours, she justified, explained, apologized, but I could not permit her to spin it. Once the truth had been laid bare. Now it was time she took responsibility. And for the first time in years, I felt like the older brother who had finally severed being a blind enabler. She didn't call me after that argument for a week. Mom asked if I'd like to call her, and I said no. Dad nodded, silently proud in his own quiet way, and I felt a strange relief. I wasn't holding the secret anymore. I wasn't the one quietly covering for her lies. I could breathe again without having that weight of false hope, but I couldn't escape the pain of betrayal, the loss of innocence, the grief that someone who I had loved absolutely had chosen to lie over tell the truth. I started thinking about what the future held, how our family would heal if indeed it could. Maybe some wounds ran too deep. Maybe trust once lost could never be regained. Weeks later, Lila phoned me, soft voice and uncertain. She apologized once more, told me she was moving out of that apartment, trying to carve out her own honest way. I felt no joy, only wary acceptance. I told her, actions speak louder than words. Show me, Lila. Don't promise to make it right. Start to repair. She agreed. That was all I could expect. I realized then that love for a brother or sister wasn't necessarily blind offering. It was calling them out, even when it broke you, even when it shattered the image you'd built up in your head since childhood. Life became lighter. I still had 3 jobs sometimes, still worried about bills, but no longer did I feel manipulated. I could sustain my family emotionally without the weight of dishonesty. Mom started smiling again, small initially, tentative, and Dad started telling jokes again, reintroducing laughter into the house. Lila started showing up in little ways, working at area shelters, helping neighbors, trying to reconstruct a reputation she had damaged. I wasn't ready to forgive yet, but I could see flashes of responsibility, and that was something, somewhat. I keep returning to that Thanksgiving, the way the air had been charged, the way the room had grown quiet as the truth emerged. I think about my anger, my hurt, my exhaustion, and I realize it was a turning point. I had discovered that love is not always selfless, that to defend someone mindlessly can hurt both of you, that sometimes revealing the truth, however uncomfortable, is the only means by which a family can be made to deal with reality and perhaps live. And perhaps that was the greatest thing, neither revenge nor punishment, but the chance to deal with the truth and begin constructing something true, even if it was imperfect and fragile. By Christmas, the house was different. Not whole, not healed, but quiet, settled into honesty at last after so long. Mom still cried sometimes, a little when no one was looking, and Dad sat up late, reading in his chair, muttering to himself about mistakes and lessons. Lila had obtained a studio apartment in the city, holding 2 jobs to make ends meet. I quit sending her money, not out of a lack of desire to help, but because helping needed to be more than a check. She needed to do it for herself, and she needed to take responsibility for it, not because I was cracking under the pressure of her lies. I remember walking home from the diner one evening, after having worked 11 hours. Snowflakes gently fell, streets were slippery, lights glowed in quiet. I thought about all the years I'd sacrificed, all the hours, all the weekends lost sleep. I thought of Lila, her choices, her lost trust, and I felt something that surprised me. Relief. Relief that I had finally faced it. Relief that I had stood up to her. Relief that our family, though as crazy as we were, could rebuild on truth instead of lies. It was ugly and painful and heartbreaking, but it was honest. Mom started attending counseling, something she had battled for years. Dad, stubborn as he was, went begrudgingly along with her. Lila joined a young adult transition support group, and she started to get an idea of how much she had done. I continued to hold back at times, especially when she acted like everything was the same. But I noticed small things. A call to touch base, a text message saying thank you for being honest, a moment of silence when she asked for my opinion instead of assuming. It wasn't perfect, and there were still days when it hurt, but it was something I could hold on to, something tangible. Work continued on, of course. 3 jobs weren't so readily given up, and honestly, I didn't want them to be. I liked the feeling of doing something, of working so hard for each penny, of knowing someone couldn't do that to me. But I learned to stop, to break, to watch my own life rather than compulsively covering for someone else. I started saving a little for myself, a little in case something went wrong, and slowly, quietly, I started thinking of a future that did not revolve around someone else's lies. It seemed strange, alien, but it was necessary. One night, a few months after the fight on Thanksgiving, Lila came over. She had her arms full of groceries, a little self-conscious, embarrassed. I didn't say anything initially, just let her set things down. Then she looked me directly in the eye, voice soft. "I know I can't make up for what I did, but I am trying. I want to be truthful even if it is hard. I want you to know that I'm really trying." I nodded. I was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's all I can ask." "Actions, Lila, not vows." She smiled, small and tentative, and I caught a glimpse of the sister I knew before. Maybe it wasn't gone for good. That evening I sat by the window, looking out at the dark streets, working through it all, about trust and betrayal, about duty and love, about where exactly to stand between supporting someone and standing up for them. I thought of all the time I'd spent in her life, and I knew I hadn't wasted it all. Because despite the lies, there was still the possibility of change, of responsibility, of truth, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the point. I do not know anything about the future. Maybe she will fall again. Maybe we will never regain the full trust. Maybe some wounds can't be healed. But I know that I learned something essential. Love is not only giving. Love is requesting truth. Love is setting limits, even if your heart gets broken. And sometimes love is standing back, letting a human enjoy the fruits of their own choice and trusting they might come out wiser, harder, and eventually honest. I still work long shifts, still sweat working overtime, still fret about bills, but now my heart is lighter. I know I did all I could, that I fought for truth, and that I was faced with a bitter truth instead of hiding it behind hope and blind faith. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel like my family, as divided as we are, stands a chance of standing on firm ground.